I think that hymn gets more smiles out of the congregation than just about anyone that we see. Amen. Oh, I hated the Old Testament for a long time. When I was in high school and I read the Bible from cover to cover for the first time, I didn't like the Old Testament. When I was a religion major in college and got my bachelor's of art in religion and studied the Bible quite closely, I didn't like the Old Testament. When I was in graduate school at Duke and Seminary working on my Master's of Divinity degree so that I could be an ordained pastor, I studied the Bible even more deeply, and I did not like the Old Testament. The main reason I didn't like the Old Testament was because of the people in it. I remember I had a particular dislike for Jacob. I mean, he took advantage of his brother to get the birthright, and then he and his mother schemed together to steal the father's blessing, and he wasn't really good with his brother-in-law Laban. They were two crooks outdoing each other, and there were just a lot of things about Jacob. And I didn't understand how we were supposed to like this guy, to admire this guy, to see him as a hero. And I was particularly annoyed by the story we're going to look at today, the people of Israel on the trek in the wilderness after the Exodus. They got on my nerves. They were the whiniest bunch of people that I ever had to deal with. And I didn't like it. I didn't like the Old Testament. But after I'd been the pastor of a local church for 6 months, I came to love the Old Testament. And with that introduction, I'm going to read kind of an extended scripture lesson. We're going to take a quick tour of the Exodus, or not the Exodus, but the time in the wilderness, not the whole 40 years, but just the time from when the Exodus was accomplished to when Moses received the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai. So the first scripture, and Rick read this last week at the end of the lesson, the Old Testament lesson. It's Exodus 14:31. Israel saw the great work that the Lord did against the Egyptians. So the people feared the Lord and believed in the Lord and in his servant Moses. Now, doesn't that kind of sound like the biblical equivalent, and they lived happily ever after? Oh, everything is so wonderful. They've been delivered from the Egyptians, and they love God, and they fear God, and in his servant Moses. And most of the rest of chapter 15 is about the song and dance routine they did, literally song and dance, talking about how wonderful God was and how he had delivered them, and just how they were going to serve God forever and ever. Then we get to the end of chapter 15, verses 22 through 26. Then Moses ordered Israel to set out from the Red Sea, and they went into the wilderness of Shur. They went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. Happily ever after lasted 3 days. Wow, that's such devotion. When they came to Marah, and I'm just saying these names the best I can, they could not drink the water of Marah because it was bitter. That is why it was called Marah. And the people complained against Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?" He cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood. He threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. And there the Lord made for them a statute and an ordinance, and there he put them to the test. I want you to note that word, test. He said, "If you will listen carefully to the voice of the Lord your God, and do what is right in his sight, and give heed to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will not bring upon you any of the diseases that I brought upon the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you." Happily Ever After, episode 2, 6 weeks. Exodus 16, 1 through 15. The whole congregation of the Israelites set out from Elam, and Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elam and Sinai, on the 15th day of the 2nd month after they had departed from the land of Egypt. The whole congregation of the Israelites complained against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat down by the flesh pots and ate our fill of bread. For you have brought us out into the wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." Then the Lord said to Moses, "I am going to rain bread from heaven for you, and each day the people shall go out and gather enough for that day. In that way I will test them, whether they will follow my instruction or not. On the 6th day, when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much as they gather on other days." So Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites, "In the evening you shall know that it was the Lord who brought you out from the land of Egypt. And in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your complaining against the Lord. For what are we that you complain against us?" And Moses said, "When the Lord gives you meat to eat in the evening and your fill of bread in the morning, because the Lord has heard the complaining that you utter against him, what are we? Your complaining is not against us, but against the Lord." Then Moses said to Aaron, "Say to the whole congregation of the Israelites, 'Draw near to the Lord, for he has heard your complaining.'" And as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the Israelites, they looked toward the wilderness, and the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. The Lord spoke to Moses and said, "I have heard the complaining of the Israelites. Say to them, at twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall have your fill of bread. Then you shall know that I am the Lord your God." In the evening quails came up and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the layer of dew lifted, there was on the surface of the wilderness was like a fine flaky substance, as fine as frost on the ground. When the Israelites saw it, they said to one another, "What is it?" Or literally, manna, for they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, "It is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat." Next chapter. Not given a time frame, but I'm going to bet it was short. 17, 1 through 7. From the wilderness of Sin, the whole congregation of the Israelites journeyed by stages as the Lord commanded. They came to Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. Okay, it's water again, folks. And the people quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." Moses said, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord?" But the people thirsted there for water, and the people complained against Moses and said, "This is starting to sound a little repetitive. Why did you bring us out of Egypt to kill us and our children and livestock with thirst?" Oh, they added livestock. That's good. So Moses cried out to the Lord, "What shall I do with this people? They are almost ready to stone me." The Lord said to Moses, "Go on ahead of the people and take some of the elders of Israel with you. Take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile and go. I will be standing there in front of you on the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock and water will come out of it so that the people may drink." Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. He called that place Massah and Meribah, because the Israelites quarreled and tested the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" I think I'm going to skip the next reading. It's from chapter 32. And of course, you'll remember when Moses was up receiving the 10 Commandments on the mountain, the people got tired of waiting, decided he wasn't coming back. So they collected all their gold, melted it down, made the image of a golden calf, bowed down and worshipped it, said, "This is the gods, these are the gods who brought us out of Egypt," and then they started to have an orgy. That's really what it was. Now, at that church, that I was talking about, after 6 months, they had their first Christmas Eve service. And I found out that their tradition on Christmas Eve was to have a Christmas tree, not a Christmas tree, a Christmas tree in the sanctuary, and everybody brought their gifts for each other, and they put them under the tree, and then they distributed them out to it. And of course, the people that were related to half the church, that were the matriarchs and the patriarchs, their stacks of gifts in the pew were shoulder high. But the people who weren't related to anybody else in the church, the people who weren't as well liked or just weren't as popular or at the center of the church, or just visiting, sat there and watched all these other people get their gifts. So at the next church council meeting in January, I thought what I made was a very reasonable, theologically sound suggestion. Made two. First was, hey, instead of a Christmas tree, why don't we put a Christmas tree? That didn't go over too well. And then I said, well, let's get rid of the gift distribution, or at least just draw names so that everybody gets a gift. And you would have thought that I had suggested we sacrifice a pig on the altar. And some of the people decided right then and there that they didn't like me, and they were determined not to like me for the next 3.5 years. And at that meeting, I became disillusioned. Let me read you the definition of disillusion. A feeling of disappointment resulting from the discovery that something is not as good as one believed it to be. And I found out that night that the church, not that church, the church, was not as good as I believed it to be. As a child growing up in the church, it was all love and support and affirmation. I mean, looking back now, I know that there were disputes and squabbles and troubles in the church, but they were all over my head. It didn't affect me. And lots of times we assume that the result of disillusionment is despair or cynicism. But for me, on that night, the disillusionment didn't result in cynicism. It didn't result in despair. It resulted in gratitude. As I finally understood the Old Testament. And the Old Testament does not describe the people of God as they should be. The Old Testament describes the people of God as we are. And I realized that we're not supposed to admire Jacob. We're not supposed to say Jacob is the hero. We're supposed to admire God. That God is the hero of the story. And those whining, complaining, quarreling people that put God to the test, we're not supposed to admire them. You know, we might have the nod of recognition. Oh yeah, I recognize those people. They're me. Now, some people will tell you that there's no grace in the Old Testament, and they act as if the God of the Old Testament is a different God from the God of the New Testament. But if there was no grace in the Old Testament, there would be no grace in the New Testament. You see, God put the people to the test. And he said, if you will follow my commandments and do what I tell you to do, then I will be your God. And they failed the test every single time. And yet God still claimed them as his people. He not only claimed them as his people, he continued to bless them when they didn't deserve it. And yet God claimed them. And God loved them. And so that night in January, that church, they failed the test. We failed the test. But that's how it is with the people of God. We constantly fail the test. We never fulfill God's hope for us. Now, we like to, I love this. We love to stand and sing. We're marching to Zion. The truth in advertising? We're being dragged to Zion. We're being dragged to the city of God, fighting and screaming the whole way lots of times. It is only by the grace of God that flawed, weak, sinful people like us are allowed to be a part of God's kingdom. We are the Old Testament. Thanks be to God, the God of grace, the God of forgiveness, the God of Jesus Christ. Amen.